sometimes big things come in small packages. So my last drink was the day before Easter 2016. If you haven't read that story, feel free to listen to this one first, but circle back because that's a big part about how I got here, to the premise of this story. After getting sober, I suddenly found myself with a lot of time. So when my birthday rolled around on June 13th, I asked Olivia if I could get a chainsaw. My plan was simple: to clear a little area and build a playhouse for Faye, who was only 1 at the time. She agreed, so I got the chainsaw, headed outside, and started clearing out the thick honeysuckle that had taken over in our backyard. There was something about the sound and smell of that saw, the feel of the wood giving way under my hands. It felt powerful. I knew right then and there that this project was going to be much bigger than I initially planned. You see, when I get into something, I go all in. It's like an obsession, an addiction of its own. So I got this idea to build a real tiny house instead of just a playhouse. And I got to work. One thing you need to understand is where I was building this was down a very steep hill. First up was the foundation, and that meant hauling 80-pound bags of concrete down the hill, one by one, because there was no way to get machinery down there. So no shortcuts, just sweat and a shovel, and every kind of weather. I wanted to quit more times than I could count, but with every bag, I felt like I was building something bigger than just a house. So one day early on, I called my dad to ask for some help. The forecast showed some rain coming, and I just put the walls up, and I didn't want the wood to get soaked, especially after spending what little money I had on materials. I figured he'd understand the urgency and come lend a hand, no question. But on the other end of the line, there was a pause, a long one. I could feel his hesitation through the silence, and it hit me like a wave. Finally, he said, "Ben, I'll help you with anything, but I'm not going to help you with that." And my heart just sank. Here was the man who had been there for me at every single turn, my rock, the one I always knew I could count on. And now when I was finally trying to do something real, something meaningful, he was holding back. It was like he'd just taken my whole effort and crushed it in one sentence. I couldn't believe it. But as the words settled in, I realized why. He thought I was building this place to hide away, to drink, to escape. He was scared. At that moment, I felt a mix of pain and motivation. Sure, his words stung, but they also lit a fire in me. I was going to prove to him and to myself that this wasn't about slipping back into old habits. I was going to finish this tiny house, rain or shine, sober and strong. I'd show him that this place wasn't a place to escape. It was a new beginning. And so I kept going. I didn't just want to finish it, I needed to finish it. To show my dad what I was capable of. That I wasn't running away from anything anymore. That house became my mission. Every nail driven with the intention to rebuild not just a structure, but the trust I'd lost. Little did I know that his hesitation, that moment of doubt, would become one of the most important lessons in my journey. Because as much as I wanted his help, I needed to learn that I could stand on my own. And board by board, I did. So I kept going. Every day after work or after meetings, I was still going to recovery meetings daily at this time. I'd stop by the hardware store and grab whatever discounted lumber I could find. Again, this tiny house became my obsession. I didn't have the money to buy new materials, so I hunted Craigslist and auction sites and anywhere I could find building supplies on a budget. I'd be down there at 4 a.m., hammer in hand, framing walls, cutting joists, and eventually putting up the roof and driving my neighbors crazy. As I kept working, something unexpected happened. Olivia's dad, Nick, came over to help a couple times. Now, Nick and I have always gotten along, but we hadn't really bonded over much before. He's the quiet, steady type, not exactly a craftsman. Nick's a scientist at Procter & Gamble. He's retired now. He's much more comfortable in a lab than out swinging a hammer, although he is handy. But he showed up ready to lend a hand where he could, and that meant the world to me. We talked about life, we talked about my sobriety, we talked about a lot of things, and it was really great to connect with him in that way. Olivia's parents and my parents had become close over the years because of our relationship. We were lucky to have families that not only supported us, but genuinely liked each other. I have no doubt that Nick and my dad had been talking about this project behind the scenes. Maybe Nick in his quiet way nudged my dad saying, "Hey, he's serious about this." I imagine he reassured my dad that my heart was in the right place, that this wasn't about slipping back or hiding away. His presence, brief as it was, felt like a quiet vote of confidence. So eventually my dad came around too. He only helped out, a few times here and there, but those visits meant everything. Most of the time it was just me down there, working alone, hauling those heavy bags and wood and driving every single nail. But when Nick or my dad showed up, even just for a couple hours, it felt like I was rebuilding something far bigger than a house. What started as a personal project became something that brought us all together in a new way. I'd been rebuilding trust with every board, every nail, every hour down there. That tiny house didn't just grow my confidence. It gave me these rare moments with both Nick and my dad, each believing in me a little more with every visit. And in that tiny space, I learned that sometimes the smallest gestures can build the biggest bridges. When it was finally done, I named it Honey Faye Cottage, a tribute to the honeysuckle I cleared and to my daughter, Faye, who's also named after my grandmother. What had started as a simple playhouse had turned into something monumental, a symbol of everything I was rebuilding in my life. I remember inviting friends over and showing them what I had built with my own 2 hands. It wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing something I'd discovered. If I could do this, maybe I could do anything. Building that tiny house showed me that piece by piece, board by board, you can rebuild your life. It was that spark of hope that would later turn into a string of hope, which has now grown into Joy Academy. So wherever you are, whatever you're facing, know this: you're capable of more than you think. Sometimes life hands you heavy things, and it's brutal. But if you stick with it, if you carry each piece down the hill and don't give up, you'll build something that matters. Board by board, we're all capable of big things, even if they start with something tiny.